And the last talk for the first session is on RadCam, a high frame rate camera for producing calibrated fireball light curves at 470 frames per second by Giancono. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Stage is yours.
Hi, I'm Dale. I'm a PhD student at the Desert Fireball Network at Curtin University. And yeah, I'm here to talk about high frame rate cameras for producing calibrated light curves. So just a bit of a quick review on photometry again. We basically want to get photometry of fireballs to assist us in calculating the photometric mass, which helps us calculate the initial mass or the final mass of the fireball. The final mass is really important if we want to get accurate fall position estimates when we do dark flight modeling and whatnot. It also can help us get insights into the internal structure of the initial meteoroid by calculating the pressure exerted on the meteor when fragmentation occurs. So identifying fragmentation through bright flaring events during bright flight is really important. Ideally, for the Desert Fireball network, we identified that we wanted to try and get photometry from magnitude 0 to magnitude -17. Obviously requires a massive dynamic range. For anything brighter than -17, we can use other data sources like Cineos. So how does the Desert Fireball network currently do photometry? One way is we use occulted long exposure imagery. So essentially we have a DSLR camera that's taking long exposures. There's a liquid crystal shutter in between the lens and the sensor, and that is encoding timing information into fireball streaks. We then perform rectangular aperture photometry on the individual dots and dashes to get the photometry. And we calibrate this photometry to stars that are in the background of the imagery near the fireball. This works really well for the start and end of fireball bright flight, where we have a sensitivity of around magnitude 0 to magnitude -8. However, it very often, especially for the fireballs we're interested in, saturates during the middle of bright flight. We also get video imagery of the fireballs using these small video cameras. There's an example of one there. We take calibration images periodically. This is done on most video camera techniques. So we can calibrate the stars in the background. Again, works really great at the start and end of bright flight, but often saturates in the middle of bright flight. So one way that we can get the important photometry of the middle of bright flight is using photomultiplier tubes, which are a form of all-sky sensor. They get the brightness of the entire sky during a fireball. They're very sensitive and have a massive dynamic range, so they work really well for this purpose. Here's an example of photomultiplier tube data of a fireball. Really great temporal resolution as well, 500 to 5,000 hertz. So we can really, with really good temporal resolution, find bright flaring events during the fireball. The way that we can calibrate this photomultiplier tube data is by getting calibrated light curves from imagery and kind of matching the photomultiplier tube data to the calibrated imagery data to calibrate it. And yeah, you combine imaging techniques with photomultiplier tubes, and we can produce a complete system with a very wide dynamic range that essentially approaches the 0 to -17 magnitude target that we want to hit. There are some operational complexities when using photomultiplier tubes. They require high voltage power supplies and sensitivity control circuits to control the sensitivity of the system when a bright moon's in the sky or not in the sky. The tubes require protection from daylight and must be replaced periodically, which is pretty challenging for the Desert Fireball network because we have a very sparse system in the middle of the desert that we don't get to service very often. Some other things they require calibration for the zenith distance, and yeah, they require calibrated imagery also. Some people also use photodiodes as a all-sky brightness sensor. Similar mechanisms to the photomultiplier tube. That solves some of the operational complexities around high voltage power supplies, protection from daylight, and they're pretty robust. They still require sensitivity control circuits and compensation for zenith distance. A lot of the fireballs we image with the Desert Fireball network are actually pretty close to the horizon, and that's just a result of our sparse network. And you'll get worse signal to noise with these all-sky brightness sensors as if a fireball is close to the horizon. The spectral response of the photodiodes also isn't ideal with a lot of information missing, not great signal around 500 nanometers and whatnot. Also can't really compensate for environmental factors out in the desert. It's really dusty, and if dust gets on whatever's protecting the photodiode, it's not a really good way to compensate for that. So we searched for an alternative to this, and we decided to have a crack at using high frame rate cameras. So we use an off-the-shelf USB machine vision camera, which has a Sony IMX426 sensor inside of it. We capture 470 frames per second of 12-bit data. It's a 0.5 megapixel resolution sensor. We have an all-sky field of view using a fisheye lens. Essentially, the fast frame rate enables quite a short exposure period, which in the end will allow us to image brighter fireballs. For the desert fireballs networks purposes, it's about 400 euros, and that's not too bad. Here's a picture of the prototype, which we installed out near Perendry in Western Australia at an existing desert fireball network site. You can see here the solar power and the batteries that power this station. And yeah, just the top here is the fisheye lens. The camera's inside the box. We take calibration frames every 20 or so minutes. We deal with a huge amount of data. It's about 470 megabytes per second. Obviously, it's not really practical to save all of that data constantly. It's not even practical to save the entire frames of a detection because essentially each detection will mean we'll probably end up with between 1 and 3 gigabytes of data, and factor in false positives, you're going to fill up hard drives really quickly. So what we do is we actually only save 100 by 100 pixels around each particular detection, and that means we get about 9.4 megabytes per second for each detection. Not factoring in the calibration frames, but they're only like 1 megabyte big, so they don't really actually add too much to the entire file size. Like all video camera systems, we can tune the sensitivity of the system. We can adjust the gain or adjust the exposure and frame rate if we really want to. We can also lower the sensitivity by changing the aperture value in the lens or adding in neutral density filters or color filters. The setup we used for this particular prototype as a proof of concept has a sensitivity of around minus 3.3 to minus 10.3 apparent magnitude. And we can, if we want to achieve the wide dynamic range that we want to achieve, we would essentially probably use multiple cameras in the setup. We process the data in real time. So after a detection, an uncalibrated light curve is immediately produced. And at the moment, it's actually published to Blue Sky, RadCam 001 at bsky.social if anyone wants to follow RadCam. We even had a couple of detections last night. We're hoping that in the future, this will enable validation from uncalibrated light curve data of different events in real time. And in theory, we can also do that validation by seeing if multiple stations have detected the same event immediately after the event. So some detections. Here's one here. What you're seeing here is a log stretched calibration image with some aggregate sum of all the frames in the detection composited over. So it looks pretty ugly, but the data's all good. So here's the fireball here. Here's the uncalibrated light curve. We can see we get like really good signal to noise just by looking at the noise floor over here. And we can see many bright flaring events during the fireball. And just contrasting this to photomultiplier tube data, we essentially end up with pretty similar looking uncalibrated light curves compared to photomultiplier tubes. Just to note, this is a different fireball event. It's not the same fireball event. It's just using as a comparison. Here's a video of the 100 by 100 pixels. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really make a fireball look very impressive, does it? But still looks pretty cool. Here's another detection. So one of the benefits of this system is when a bright moon's up high in the sky, we don't change the sensitivity of the system at all. It just operates as is. And we get still very good signal to noise ratio, even when a full moon is completely up at the zenith. And yeah, again, we can see lots of really nice bright flaring events with really nice temporal resolution. Finally, last detection I'm just going to show you. This was a not very bright fireball, so the signal to noise of the system isn't as good. But the difference with this one is we also captured it with a co-located Sony IMX249 system, which was operating at 30 frames a second. And you can see the uncalibrated data here. And just something to note is that we can see quite a few little flaring events that you can't necessarily notice on the 30 frames per second. We also captured this event with a free-point camera that was located around 300 to 400 kilometers away. And we got the absolute magnitude for each system, and there's good agreement between the three systems within plus minus 0.5 absolute magnitude for the majority of the light curve. Yeah. So just in conclusion, we deployed a 470 frames per second high frame rate camera prototype to evaluate whether this was a good alternative to photomultiplier tubes for photometry. And we've got multiple fireball detections that validates its performance, that it works well. In the future, we want to add GNSS time stamping and multi-camera setup to cover a wider dynamic range. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. So it seems that some of us are moving in the same direction to augment the ordinary camera's additional systems to get photometry and other things, high-speed photometry. Time for questions. 1 or 2 questions. I will not yet mention the coffee break. I won't leave you to the coffee break before I didn't hear at least one question. Haha, there's one.
Okay, it's for the coffee and for the question and the same. Thank you very much. Very interesting time lapse. It's also something that interests me for meteors. Is this a CMOS camera with a rolling shutter? And
no, it's a CMOS with a global shutter.
With a global shutter.
Yep.
Okay, okay. That's then I cannot ask my question.
Okay.
I still count it. There's one more question by Mike.
I was just curious what your CPU computer requirements are to manage the data stream coming in from the camera. Are you using the same PC that you would use for the fisheye lens or system or the DFN system, or does it require another PC as well?
Yeah, great question. So we use a slightly different computer to the DFN cameras currently. Look, I think it uses one core, 50% of a 8th generation i7 processor. I know that's not like a perfect metric or anything, but it does probably give you a good idea. With the software, we're not processing every single frame for a detection. We're stacking frames to try and decrease some of that CPU usage. And we actually think that we can probably decrease that even further as an optimization to do in the future. But yeah, the CPU usage doesn't seem to be too high. And I think with some optimization, we can get it working with some pretty low power computers. Yep.
Okay, and since there are no more online questions, all from the online participants, let's thank Dale again.